A Sheep Called Clarence by Jessica Reardon. Clarence was a clever sheep. He knew right from wrong. He knitted, helped his friends, and learned the alphabet by song. This is Clarence's story of how one good sheep can fall, and how everyone makes a difference, no matter how big or small. It began the day a gang of sheep rode into the town. With their dark and steely wool, they made every farmer frown. They terrorized the village, in the paddock they did rule. They called themselves the Steelcoats. They were tough and they were cool. They rode in on a tractor they had stolen from a farm, and they wore leather jackets with tattoos up the arm. One night when the sun was setting, and he was trying not to shiver, Clarence saw the gang approach and his white woolly curls began to quiver. "Hey, Clarence," said the leader with a toothy grin. "Join us for some hay tonight. We'll meet behind the bin." The bin was a famous hangout, far from Clarence's shed, where the Steelcoats liked to sleep, though they were too tough for a bed. Clarence knew he should say no. The Steelcoats were known to be sly. The leader smiled and winked, or blinked, for he only had one eye. "Okay," stammered Clarence. He wanted to look brave. You never know, he thought. Maybe bad sheep can behave. That night under the moonlight, one small white sheep did sneak past his mother from the shed and over Craggy Creek to sit among the Steelcoats and listen to a plan to take some grain from Farmer Bean, who was not a very nice man. Farmer Bean was a grumpy man, everybody knew. But over in his fields the tall grain always grew. It had been a bumper season. It almost made the farmer smile, but the best that he could manage was not frowning for a while. The Steelcoats had a map of how to get into the farm. We take what we can carry and we keep ourselves from harm. Clarence wasn't sure. Deep down he had a bad feeling. He wanted to be in the gang, but it sounded a bit like stealing. "We're your friends," the leader said. "Getting caught is not a factor, and Clarence, if you come, I'll let you ride up on the tractor." Then Scruff, the toughest Steelcoat, said, "Clarence, don't you fear. It's easy, really, trust us. We do this every year." Clarence wanted to say no. He knew that it was wrong, but deep down inside us, we all want to belong. And sometimes this desire to say yes to our friends, as Clarence was to find out, it does not pay dividends. It was decided that on Friday they would visit Farmer Bean, wearing special sheep masks so their faces were not seen. That night under the moonlight, one small white sheep did sneak past his mother from the shed and over Craggy Creek to sit atop a tractor, and although he didn't have steel wool, riding with the gang he felt tough and he felt cool. At the back of Farmer Bean's the sheep arrived on trucks and bikes. The wall of the farm was 10 feet high and covered in steely spikes. They waited for the signal, then the leader lit a flare, and one by one they jumped, their parachutes opening in the air. The farmyard dogs were sleeping. There was no one else in sight. The sheep gang crept towards their prize, their Steelcoats hid them from the light. They found the grain bags piled up high. He had a lot to share. Maybe it's like the Steelcoats said, to take some is only fair. They began to load them one by one. Things were going well, when a noisy little rooster, the farmer trained to spy and tell, found some hoofprints heading in the direction of his food, lifted his beak and very loudly cock-a-doodle-doo. Farmer Bean heard the sound. The lights went on with a bang. "It's probably nothing," said Scruff. "Let's continue with the plan." But the leader of the Steelcoats knew the jig was up. "Let's get out of here," he said, and headed for the truck. The sheep all bolted to the fence, the grain bags on their backs. Clarence scrambled after them, carrying 3 more sacks. As the sheep ran through the farm, they left a golden trail of grain. And to make the matters worse, it suddenly began to rain. But through the rain they saw the gate, not too far to go. Though with all the grain Clarence had, he was a little slow. It was nearly over. The end was clear in sight, and soon he would be safe at home to forget this sorry night. But Farmer Bean had had enough of grain-thieving sheep. He'd installed a barbed wire fence which, if touched, would loudly beep. The Steelcoat gang had got there first and set off the alarm. But when they climbed the fence, their steel wool coats kept them from harm. Clarence looked with fear at the fence the farmer made. "Throw the grain," the leader said. His heart racing, Clarence obeyed. He tossed the grain sacks over and then began to climb. While he wobbled on the wire, he was making some good time. But that was when poor Clarence ran firmly out of luck. His curly wool was getting tangled. It was clear that he was stuck. "Help me!" Clarence called to the leader of the gang. "Help me!" he cried while the loud alarm bell rang. The more he struggled, the more his woolly coat became entangled, and over the side of the fence his little sheep hooves dangled. The leader jumped on a farm bike and rode back down to the fence. And though he hadn't been to school, he certainly wasn't dense. He smiled at Clarence and shook his head. "There ain't room for us all, and if I come and help you, who'll be left to take the fall?" Then the Steelcoats drove away. Their laughter echoed all around. And suddenly, behind him, Clarence heard a scary sound. "What have we here?" said Farmer Bean. His voice was hard and mean. "A would-be thief, a wayward sheep who tried to take my grain? That is going to cost you!" Farmer Bean yelled through the rain. Then he pulled out shiny clippers, very sharp and newly painted. Poor Clarence took one look at them and very nearly fainted. He gave Clarence a haircut that he'd not soon forget, and then paraded him through the town on a leash just like a pet. He took him through the main streets where he could be seen and made him wear a sign that said, "Don't steal from Mr. Bean." People laughed and pointed. What could poor Clarence do? He hung his head and went bright pink, for sheep feel sheepish too. And now Clarence is a clever sheep. He knows right from wrong. He knits and helps his friends. He learnt the alphabet by song. In the paddock, his mother is the only one who'll rule. And he studies every day at the local sheep business school. He rides around on a tractor, no one knows where it is from, and tells the other sheep about the importance of right and wrong. But what kind of story would this be if baddies got away and lived out their days stealing grain and sleeping in the hay? The Steelcoat gang were caught in town. They left a clear grain trail, and having such long records, they were sent straight into jail. "But I swear that we are innocent," the leader did yell and shout. Luckily, they had a friend who liked to help others out. Clarence came one day and bailed them out of their cell. "I'm so sorry," the leader said. "I can't begin to tell." "That's okay," Clarence said. "Your apology is satisfactory. On the conditions that you must work in my new steel wool factory." So they all lived happily ever after, though for the Steelcoats not so well. Sometimes helping others pays off more than you can tell.